The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Mark Webster here. Today, Battalion Chief Scott Carmody and Lieutenant Patrick Dunn are going to be presenting a second installment of Talking Tactics with an emphasis on Enginie operations. So here you go.
Okay, so this is episode number 2 of Talking Tactics. The first month we covered rescue mode. That was back in January. We are hoping to have this be a more interactive type process, but we're working through some IT issues on that end to try to get there. So at the time being, we are hoping to make this as interactive, like I said, as possible. So if you have questions or comments, if you submit the questions, Mark Webster's monitoring those and can pass the questions on to us. So the plan with the Talking Tactics presentations is to alternate an engine month topic and a rescue or a truck month topic. So we did rescue mode last time, so we're doing engine operations this time through. Chief, you want to kind of touch on the ground rules that we established as we were kind of thinking through this project?
Yeah, sure. So just to review, these Talking Tactics training deals are, we wanted to keep them short. So we're really, a half hour, 45 minutes would be ideal, but our goal is to definitely keep them under 60 minutes. Totally voluntary. This is not a requirement from training. It was just something that was kind of dreamed up, and it seemed to pick up some traction. So we just wanted to put it out there. It's voluntary as far as just watching it. It is being recorded, I believe. Is it not, Mark? Is it being recorded?
Yes, it is. It's being recorded.
Okay, so yeah, it's being recorded and it'll be posted so other shifts can watch it again, on a voluntary basis. And then, Patrick, what was the POV again?
Point of view.
Point of view, yeah. So these are just simply just my points of view and Patrick's from experiences and trainings and classes. These don't necessarily, follow policy. They're definitely not going to be contradictory to any policy that we have, but it's just more of our point of view, just passing on experiences that we've had and what, how we feel and think about things in the fire service related to structural firefighting anyway. And so Patrick, he's quite a bit more versed on the UL study results than I am, so he's going to kind of talk about just a few points from the results of the recent UL study as it relates to fire streams, and then we'll kind of do an overview of the 12 commandments of engine company operations, which you may or may not have seen floating around the fire district, and then we'll kind of tie in a few of the commandments to those UL study results that we were gonna go over. And if we have time, there's a couple of scenario-based things that we can kind of go through about as far as hose line selection and the stretch and location, and some of your thoughts and ideas on some scenarios. So I guess Patrick could go right into the UL study at this point, I think.
Okay, so the UL has done several studies on fireground operations. They've done a couple different studies on fire streams and fire attack. The initial studies that were done, they looked at primarily exterior streams or transitional attack type operations. I think there was a saying, or at the time, that you didn't want to push fire. There was a thought that you could push fire, meaning like the flaming combustion from one room to the next, and create a lot of exposure downstream from where you're applying the stream. And some of those initial studies showed that that's not necessarily the case. The question with some of those that left it unanswered is they really looked at, is it better to not apply water at all or to apply an exterior stream? And I think most people, when you're looking at that, that becomes a pretty obvious question. Well, of course it's better to apply water than not to apply water. at a structure fire. There was a group out in the fire service that said, hey, if we're going to compare these, we really should be comparing interior streams versus exterior streams, not comparing water versus no water as it relates to fire attack. So this stream, the study was, so they completed this study and put out the results in January of this year. They were looking at the effect of interior versus exterior streams, and also looking at occupant survival, looking at how it affects an occupant that could be in the building that's not in turnouts, that's not in an SCBA, how it affects our civilians, as it relates to steam burns, higher humidity once we add water to the fire environment, survivability profiling, touched on a bunch of different things. The study was broken up into 3 parts. One was water mapping, the second's air entrainment, and then the last one was full-scale experiments. They were all done in the lab or on the drill grounds. And the next study that they're looking at is coordinated fire attack in acquired structures. So they've done studies on vertical ventilation without fire attack, PPV without fire attack, and then they've done studies on fire attack. The next, they're going to look at like strip mall type buildings and 2-story buildings, looking at actually coordinating fire attack and different types of ventilation to see how those work when they're going together. So the first one was water mapping. So why does this matter? Well, it turns out to actually extinguish the fire, we need to put water on the burning fuels. So they wanted to look at how does different nozzle types, different nozzle locations, different streams, different patterns, and different movements of the hose line, how does that affect where the water goes within the fire compartment. So the picture on the bottom of the screen there is the experimental setup. They basically had it set up like a 2-story, a room on the 2nd story. They had the stairs going up so that they could simulate what it would be like to apply a stream from the hallway. And they looked at different angles, different movement patterns. Then they were also able to basically put water through the window from the ground floor to simulate what it would be like if you were putting water into a 2nd-story bedroom window. One of the limitations of this setup was the collection bins that they had in the bottom of the room were designed to catch water from their sprinkler experiments. And so they couldn't apply the hose stream to the floor because that would basically destroy the collection bins. They just weren't meant to hold up to that kind of force. So when they looked at moving a stream in like an O pattern or an N pattern or a T pattern, it was an O pattern up towards the ceiling, not an O pattern as we would typically use it as you're doing wall, ceiling, wall, floor to get more full coverage. So a bit of a limitation there in terms of how the experiment was set up. So what did they figure out? Well, so the tactical considerations of this part, they figured out that the nozzle type, whether it's a smooth bore or a straight stream, the movement pattern, whether it's O, T, or N, really those things all have negligible impact. A combination nozzle on a straight stream and a smooth bore basically applied water in the room in the same manner. What they did find that changed the effectiveness was the impact of the angle. So the steeper the angle, the better. However, having said that, if you look at the pictures on the right, so that's the room, and you can see all the water. So that's a map of how much water fell into each of the collection bins. And it all basically is against either the back wall or around the outsides of the room. So there was a thought that when you bounced water off the ceiling, it basically simulated a sprinkler where you got nice full coverage of the room, and it turns out that's not the case. Water basically is it's sticky, and it has a velocity or a force to it, and so when you bounce it off the ceiling, it basically runs along the ceiling till it hits the back wall and then comes down the back wall. If you apply it at a really steep angle, it'll hit the ceiling and run out to the walls on the side as well as the back wall and run down the side. So steeper is better. However, they really were not able to get any water in the middle of the room, or a very negligible amount of water in the middle of the room without actually getting the nozzle into the fire room. So the effectiveness is really limited to line of sight, and the ability to apply water is really limited if the nozzle's outside of the fire compartment. One of the videos that was up at one point, they had burning pallets in the middle of the room. They're applying water from the outside. They're cooling the compartment and cooling the gases, but it's really having no effect on the pallet fire because, again, you're not getting any water in the middle of the room. So, so something to keep in mind for extinguishment. We really need to be able to get the nozzle inside the fire compartment. Anything to add to that, Chief?
Can you go back to that real quick?
Yeah.
I had something that came to mind. So it is clear to me that it does do a good job of wetting some of the fuels on the perimeters of the room. So, and then there wasn't there a result that they had talked about where if you applied water to the door header or the window header, you actually got the best result?
Yeah, and I think that's something they're going to look at more in the next experiment. Yeah, if you could hit the window header, you got a little bit better deflection into the middle of the room. However, the warning with that is that you don't want to actually cover, if that's your only vent, then you don't necessarily want to cover the exhaust.
Gotcha.
Push all the smoke back into the structure and heat.
And so the take home here would be to apply water at as steep of angle as possible, which, from the, if you're applying window through a second, or water through a window on a second story, your angle's probably going to be pretty good as anyway. But I thought that was pretty fascinating about the surface tension of the water wanting to ride along the ceiling before it fell down into the room. I think that was the only comment I had.
Okay. So the next part of the study was air entrainment. So the question would be, why does air entrainment matter? Well, air entrainment's ventilation, and ventilation without water increases fire growth. We're also need to be concerned about flow paths. Depending on how much air we entrain, we actually have the ability to change the flow path, which can be positive or can be negative, depending on what we do to it. And then air entrainment also has the ability to overpressurize a compartment. So one of the theoretical complaints with fog nozzles in the past, prior to this, was that if you get a bunch of steam conversion and then overpressurize the compartment, you basically turn the entire room. You take away the thermal layering, and you bring the hot steam down to the floor, and you can steam burn. We can steam burn ourselves or steam burn any victims that are in there. So that was one of the things they wanted to look at in terms of air entrainment, is do we overpressurize compartments? What they found out was the smooth bore and a straight stream, a combination nozzle on straight stream, basically have the equivalent air entrainment, about 1500 CFM. The air entrainment increases with the width of a fog pattern, and can be from 8 to 12,000 with a narrow fog pattern, and then can go up from there. And then an increase in stream length increases air entrainment. So if you are putting water in through a second-story window as opposed to a first-story window, you'll entrain more air going up to a second-story window than you do the first floor. And then nozzle movement increases air entrainment. And then finally down at the bottom, fog stream O pattern. So if you were to combine the fog pattern with an aggressive O movement, you actually have the ability to move the same amount of air as you do with a PPV fan. So so potentially, if you're talking about using a smooth bore for interior attack, especially if you have a vent ahead of you, if you're moving the line aggressively in an O or an N pattern and applying water, you are in effect getting coordinated fire attack and ventilation. You are moving air and you are attacking the fire at the same time. The full scale of anything to add on the air entrainment, Chief?
No, not really. I did, I think I have, since I started, I've seen a reduction in the amount of times I see fog stream ventilation as far as after knockdown. And I think knowing now that it moves that much air, we might see a resurgence of that occurring, because I think that can have a good effect after knockdown, and to just get some of the smoke out of the compartment. So, but I mean, there's techniques of being able to use the smooth bore as far as half baling or whatever to get kind of a rough rough-looking stream, and I don't know if they did any of the testing as far as how much air that entrains or not. Do you know? Did they do any detailed experiments like that with the smooth bores?
They did not for this experiment, but it brought up those exact questions, and so that's supposed to be part of the next experiment. They are going to do air entrainment on half-baled smooth bores to see how much it is, because I think for people that have played around with that, it's very clear that you get a ton more air entrainment, either by half-baling. With our stream straighteners, you don't get nearly as much of a fog effect, but if we took the stream straighteners off, or if you just take the tip off and you're just using the ball shutoff, I think it's pretty clear you can entrain a ton of air and can have very effective hydraulic ventilation.
Yeah. So, but you can also see, if you're moving that much air and the water is not getting onto the fire itself, you're just bringing that much more, air and oxygen into the building. So it's really something to be aware of, actually.
Yeah, for sure. If you're talking about a fog pattern, I mean, you're really looking at a stream reach of, I don't know, 6 to 8 feet. And then certainly the air you're pushing reaches much further. So you may have a positive impact on the area immediately in front of you, but could actually have a very negative impact downstream. One of the full-scale experiments they did was a fog pattern through a window with a 2-bedroom fire, and it extinguished the first bedroom and actually created flashover type conditions in the adjacent room that was on fire, because that room was getting no water and a ton of air.
Yeah, very interesting.
So full-scale experiments. So they basically built two 1,600 square foot ranch-style homes. Yes.
I don't know what you did, but you turned. Maybe it was just me, but your volume went up about tenfold. It's blowing my ears.
Is that better?
No, I don't know what happened. I wasn't even touching my computer. My volume just started blowing me out. I'll work on it on my end.
All right. The full-scale experiment. So they built 1,600 square foot single-story ranch type configuration homes. They actually went into a lot of detail with these. They bought modern furniture packages, and they actually purchased so they did 30 to 40 full-scale experiments. They went to some furniture store and they bought 50 sets of identical furnishings, so that once they did one experiment, they could pull all the furniture out, all the carpet out, all the drywall out, and actually re-carpet, refurnish, and re-drywall between every experiment. So they would have the two houses sitting side by side. They would do a morning burn in the one, and then would start breaking that one down, and then would do an afternoon burn in the other, so that they kept everything as consistent as possible from one experiment to the next. It's a pretty long report if you read it, but they do have tactical considerations, 16 or 20 tactical considerations, which break down the results pretty well. And then there's also some online training you can do that'll go through the lessons learned. So we picked out a few of the tactical considerations that we thought applied to the engine company commandments that we were going to cover today. First one being, if you get the water where it needs to go, you don't need much. So they were looking at single room fires and 2-room fires fully developed. They looked at transitional attack. They looked at interior attack with a fog pattern with a straight stream. They looked at a hit and move where you open the line up, flow it for 5 to 8 seconds, then shut it down, advance the line forward, and then open it up again, and you do that till you make the fire room. They looked at that versus keeping the line open the whole time and actually flowing as you made it all the way down the hallway, so keeping the line open the whole time. In all of those experiments to put out the 1- and 2-room fires, they were looking at as little as 50 gallons of water and as much as, I believe, 150 gallons of water. And so that's for a fully developed 2-room fire with 2 vents. So if you get the water where it needs to go, you really don't need that much, at least especially when it's confined within the box. One of the other tactical considerations is the need to cool as you advance. That has, as they were working down the hallway, there was applying water as they advanced had a huge beneficial effect, both in lowering temperatures and in taking the products of combustion, the smoke and the steam, and pushing it away from the attack crew and towards the vent. So very positive impacts. They also determined that in our turnouts, we do a very poor job of sensing what kind of temperature growth we're having. So they would look at the temperature sensors for heat growth, and then they would ask the crews what they thought, and they found there was very little correlation between what was actually happening with temperatures and what the attack crew felt like was happening with temperatures. So we are, and I don't think that comes as a big surprise probably to most of us, that we're so well encapsulated in our turnouts that we really have a very limited ability to judge increasing temperature until it gets to a very critical phase where you have to apply water right now, or it's going to get to a flashover point. Effective gas cooling. They found that with the smoothbore, the straight stream, they had a very effective gas cooling effect, and that they needed a high flow rate to do that. They had a couple experimental setups where they did more of a fog pulse, and they basically found that at least in the way they had set the experiment up, that the fog pulse was pretty much totally ineffective. They looked at steam expansion versus hot gas contraction. So we all learn in the firefighter academy that steam expands 1,700 times, or water expands 1,700 times when it turns into steam. But the other phenomenon we don't talk about as much is the hot gas contraction. So as you take the hot gases and cool them, you're going to contract. What they found was the net effect was actually gas contraction. So you actually get more gas contraction than you do steam expansion. And this particularly came into effect when they were doing a fire attack without vent. They actually found they were able to get lift and relief from the heat even without a vent, just because the hot gases contract and pulled up towards the ceiling. Flow versus shutdown. The push, so flowing and moving where you're keeping the nozzle open and actually advancing with an open flowing hand line, provided constant cooling around and ahead of the hose line. It also changed the flow path to direct the hot gases away from the attack crew. The shutdown allowed for a little bit faster movement in the experiments, but they found out that a rebound starts to occur as soon as you shut the nozzle down. If we're not getting water on the seat of the fire, as soon as you shut the nozzle down, you start to get a rebound of temperatures. As long as the attack crew didn't wait more than 10 to 15 seconds to apply water again, the rebound never came all the way back to its original levels. But just know that rebound starts to occur whenever you shut the line down. So then it then developed into a little bit of a debate about whether are you better off keeping the line open and moving and flowing, or are you better doing the shutdown and move and advancing a little bit quicker? And at least the panel's recommendations came down to, well, it depends on level of training and staffing. If you have, yes.
Hey, we got a question.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. The question is, how large is the rebound during shutdown?
So for about 10 to 15 seconds, so they had the temperatures in the hallway, I believe were at the ceiling, were in like the 800 degree range, 800 to 1,000 degree range. They were starting to get rollover into the hallway. They would knock it down to like 200 degrees. And as soon as they shut the line down, it would start to rebuild. As long as they opened the line back up within 10 to 15 seconds, the temperatures never got back up to 1,000 degrees. But they did start. But if you think about it, 10 to 15 seconds, not that long, especially if you're trying to, move around furniture or, obviously we don't have great visibility. So that's hopefully that answers the question. So so that's kind of the debate, is how quickly could you if you could put training into flowing and moving, that provides the best cooling and the best flow path control. But shutdown and move obviously is a little bit physically easier to do. It requires less training, and requires less staffing. So and then for the transitional attacks, again, they had that same rebound phenomenon. And so the big takeaway with transitional attack was that speed is the key. If you're going to start the attack from outside and transition to the outside, you need to make sure that transition happens as quickly as possible, because as soon as you shut the line down and go to move it to reposition, that fire starts regrowing immediately. So, and then at the bottom is the link for, if you go to ulfirefightersafety.org, you can actually get not only online training going through this stuff, but the reports, the full reports. Anything to add, Chief?
The speed of transition is a fascinating topic to me. You know, I fully support an exterior attack when it's appropriate. But again, like you just said, the speed to which you can transition into the interior is the key. And also remember, just because, you know, I think they figured this out in some of these tests too, is just because you're seeing fire out a window doesn't necessarily mean that the fire is contained to that particular room. And so if you can get water through a window and actually get the nozzle in like a first story window and get some decent amount of water on the fuels in that room, that doesn't mean that there's not another room or two burning. So just because where fire is showing isn't telling you everything about what's going on inside the building. So that speed of that transition is the whole thing. And then Ray McCormick from New York, I don't know if he's still there or retired or not, but he talks about knocking back the fire, knocking down the fire, and extinguishing the fire, and how you've got to get the hose line and the firefighters inside the room in order to extinguish. But you can definitely have a very good impact on knocking back or knocking down the fire from exterior, but that doesn't eliminate the need to get inside the building. So anyway, the speed of transition is the key here.
All right, Chief, you want to go through the, so that wraps up. We were trying to kind of blaze through the takeaways, or some of the takeaways. That's a small portion of it from the UL study. So you want to now go through the engine company commandments?
Yeah, we'll blow through these. How many pages was the report? I mean, you talk about blazing through it. It was over 1,000 pages or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, the first part of the study's about 100 pages, second part's about 100 pages, and the last part's about 800 pages. However, a lot of that is graphs and data. If you just read the tactical considerations part from all three studies, that's a total of probably 20 pages from all three of them. And again, they have a pretty neat online training program that'll take you through some of the lessons learned.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I had the opportunity to hear Dennis Laguerre kind of present those findings back in January, so that was kind of nice. Anyway, those of you who haven't seen these, they are floating around. We can definitely get you a copy of them. These literally were born at the kitchen table where most of our problems are solved, as we all know. But just in a very short conversation, wrote these down. I started giving them to company officers a few years back, and anyway, they kind of grew from there. But and these are just some things that, from my experiences, which make sense and have kind of been successful for me along the way. So getting the pumper, the number one is getting the pumper, away from the front of the building if possible, and stretching hose to the objective. The idea there is, as I've said it a million times, you can always stretch hose around objects and add lengths of hose if you need to, or stretch a longer hose. But things like ladders and aerials and stuff are kind of have a fixed length, so they're a little bit less flexible in that regard. So, and then the other thing to put here is on the water supply end of things too, is if you see there's a hydrant in front of the house next door, I think it's an excellent tactic to pull in front of that house or stop in front of that house and go ahead and utilize that full water supply there and stretch hose to the structure. Number two, I just want to try to blow through these real quick. Number two, I believe that first pumper on scene, their primary objective is to get water on the fire. So that's why I'm a big proponent of passing command and having the whole crew concentrate on getting a good stretch and a timely stretch and getting water on the fire. And then along with that, I know a lot of times that second pumper gets there and they take care of water supply, and we give them standby or a backup line or something. But remember, if it does no good to back up a line that's not operating. So if you're the second pumper due, in my opinion, I think you need, even if you've been assigned a backup line, I think you need to make sure that first line is in place, it's stretched, and it's flowing water before you worry about backing it up. Because if you're backing up a hose that's not operating, you're not doing much good. So give them a hand if need be. If it's a long stretch, apartment complex, center hallway, whatever it is, give them a hand if they don't have it flowing. Number four, Then, the secondary function is, to stretch that backup line of equal or greater size. We do a good job with that. And then, of course, we've made the switch to reverse lane in the fire district since these were written down. But strongly consider reverse lane. I think it gets some of that unnecessary equipment, away from the building, creates room for us to operate a little bit better, and it also, as you know, with the supply policy and everything, it just helps with the pressure. And if we need a lot of water, we can get it. Also adds redundancy if we have a pumper breakdown, and all those other issues. Number 6, I'm not a big proponent of seeing the water following the person that's stretching the hose, because many times the officer or somebody says, no, you know what, let's pull it around to the side and make entry through the garage or whatever it is, and moving a charged hose line is much harder than moving one that isn't charged. So get it in place, call for water, and then charge it and get it going. Number 7, excuse me. I never was a proponent of spritzing and penciling and that stuff. So I always, and I think it might have been actually Jeff Dietz that coined the phrase "wet rooms don't burn." So I'm a proponent of opening the nozzle all the way and continuously. Again, like Pat said, that comes down to training, whether you're good at that or not. But as much water as you could flow, the safer you're going to be. I haven't yet read any firefighter deaths in flashover where the nozzle was actually flowing water. So that's one thing you can do to really make sure you're safe when you're attacking fire. Number 8, that's just kind of it's almost a redundant commandment for number 1. Nothing shall deter you from getting water to the fire. Number 9, and we've dealt with this with some of our stretching techniques that we use now, but we got to spread out, position ourselves at corners and pinch points to ensure a smooth stretch. I can't tell you how many times on the truck when I was in trying to do a search, or I'd hear the engine company asking for more hose, but they were all standing next to each other or bunched up at the nozzle when they should be spread out and helping with that stretch. We do a good job now with number 10. We don't give up working line until we complete the stretch. That way he has a line to enter the apartment or whatever type of building he's going into to fight fire. 11, don't delay the application of water from the exterior while waiting. So this speaks to particularly in the rural areas where you don't have a 2-out company come in. So this is where I get into where exterior attacks make a lot of sense. So don't wait to put water from the exterior while waiting for support functions. And one thing that probably should be on there is while waiting for 2-out or a backup team or whatever, got to get water on the fire somewhere or another. But again, now that the UL study's out, it's that reflex time. It's that, whatever the term was about getting in there and transitioning to the inside and getting water in there quickly as soon as you can. Number 12 and the last one was just talking about flow paths and how opening windows and doors affects the fire behavior, and make sure that you're trained in that, you understand how it works, and then use it to your advantage, and also control it when need be, and understand how like half bailing a smooth bore affects air entrainment and how that can affect flow paths. So that's kind of just a quick overview of those 12 commandments that we called them.
One of the interesting takeaways that was a little more subtle from the UL study relating to commandment number 12, door control and flow path. UL's done a lot of work on flow path and showing how powerful door control can be in helping to snuff out a fire and keeping it from growing. With the oxygen limited fires, it really is the air that's the throttle of how fast the fire grows. So based on that, there were some departments out there that started to really encourage trying to keep the doors closed, not only prior to entry, but also after entry during fire attack. which makes it a little bit tougher to help advance the hose, because now you're creating a pinch point that doesn't have to be there. Well, one of the things they figured out in the study is once you start applying water on the inside of the building, it's actually better to have the door open, because you actually want that fresh, cold air coming in to replace as you're getting that hot gas contraction and that gas layer is lifting, you want as much fresh air coming in as possible to replace the air near the floor. It makes it better for us. It makes it better for civilians that could be in there.
Good point. Good point.
All right, so now touching on a couple of the specific commandments related to some of the study. So, yeah, I don't know, Chief, you want to go through this?
Yeah, I can help you. So number 7, the engine company don't pencil. This is where I talk about flowing lots of water. And I don't know if you've heard the emerging phrase gallons per second. I've been talking about it for a couple of years. And I know that Kurt Isaacson has an entire class that's actually called gallons per second. He comes out of Florida, very energetic, effective speaker. Great class if you ever have a chance to take it. But this all talks about the speed of actually the stretch and getting water to the fire, and then the amount of water that you're flowing. And so again, the goal of flowing water is to cool the surfaces of the fuel. You're getting a lot of gas cooling with that contraction that we're talking about, and then you got to get inside to get water on the fuel to get extinguishment. And of course, exposure control is a big deal, but I just really am a proponent of flowing a lot of water. I'm not worried about water damage so much. Who was it, Patrick, that recently talked about water damage, and then they related it to Texas and all the flooding they had, and they said, look, Texas is still there, it's drying out, So
right, Texas floods every year. They dry it out. Everybody does just fine.
Yeah, it's a good point to make. But I'm relating this more specific to the fire control, but also your safety. I just don't want anyone to get caught in a flashover situation when it could have been avoided, obviously. And it also allows you to cool as you advance if you're able to train enough to be effective at moving the line while it's flowing. And the other thing that I've had some of my companies go out and train on is actually retreating with flowing water. So if you ever get yourself in a bad situation where you need to back out, but it's really hot, the last thing you might want to do is shut the nozzle off and try to withdraw, where, maybe it would be a good thing for you to know how to do is to flow water while you're retreating too. So that's kind of the way that relates to what the UL study was talking about, as far as I can tell. I don't know, Pat, you probably have something to add to that.
Well, yeah, and just to add to that, the picture that I added on the right-hand side of the screen there, really those are the 5 components we're looking to accomplish, or 5 things we're looking to accomplish with that fire stream and with fire attack. When you have the well-developed fire that is borderline flashover, the box can't absorb any more heat. It's hot. It's starting to radiate heat back in, which is really when you start to get those the temperatures that jump exponentially. You have the hot smoke in there that's fuel. That's really the fuel that's going to get us, and it's not only in the room we're in, but can be behind us as well. So you can start to get the fire lighting off behind you and then burning back towards you. The flames, obviously, the fuel surfaces, that's the heat pump of the fire. That's really what's generating the heat and the smoke. And then the unaffected fuel, as that fire starts to preheat, the fuels around it, it starts to off gas and just starts to add to our problem. Even if it's not something that could burn, even if it's like a stone countertop, that can absorb heat and then start to radiate it back into the room and cause the burning. The materials that can burn can cause them to preheat. So with fire attack, we're trying to cool the hot surfaces, get water up in the ceiling and the walls, cool the hot surface, cool the box down so it can start absorbing heat for us again and start working like a heat sink. We want to cool the hot smoke, get gas cooling so that we cool that fuel so it can't light off on us. Obviously, we want to put the flames out. We want to stop the heat pump of the fire that's generating the problem, so we got to get water on that. The fuel, the solid gas interface, we have to get water on that to stop the off-gassing of fuels. And then if you get water on the unaffected fuels in the room nearby, you're basically doing exposure protection. So we talk about exposure protection with fire attack. Usually we're talking about the house next door. Well, the immediate exposure problem we have is the chair that's next to the couch on fire, or the room that we're passing that's not on fire on the way to the room that is. And so we should think about exposure protections as those closest to the fire, which are the ones inside the building. We should think about it in that regard as well.
Okay.
Commandments 8 and 11.
So we're not going to deter the energy company from getting water to the fire by any means. An energy company should not delay the application of water from the exterior. So the goal in almost all of our fires is an offensive attack, and we want to occupy the interior of the structure as early as possible. So that's really what the push is. At least when I'm at a fire, it's like that's my goal, is to get the fire knocked back, knocked down, and extinguished. And the only way to do that is to occupy the interior of the structure with human beings. And there's no other way to provide a good and rapid and complete search of the building without being inside. So just getting water in there, you talk about gallons per second, you can talk about this for a long time, and it's really the push for getting that company to the front of the building, getting that stretch fast, passing command, and then that second pumper. One of the main reasons we try to reverse lay is not so much to get the pumper at the hydrant, but it gets the rest of the personnel off the rig in front of the building and either assisting with that initial fire line getting in place, stretched and operating, or getting that backup or that standby crew established that much faster to get us inside the interior of the building that much faster. So that's really the push there. Some of the delays we obviously run into are the 2 in 2 out situation where we're waiting for another company. And that really, the rural staffing, that just the spread out, the location of the rural stations, complicates that issue. And then some of the needs for the support functions before we can provide fire attack, like ventilation. If you can't get in the building because you don't have adequate ventilation, then that is one time where an exterior fire attack makes perfect sense. And then again, we've said it several times this morning, but the speed of that transition from exterior to interior is going to be the key to stopping that fire from regrowing back to its original strength.
Yeah, the recommendation of the panel as far as evaluating whether transitional attack is effective is you do it till you see the effect you're looking for, and if you don't see the effect you're looking for, change the angle of the stream, and if you still don't see the effect you're looking for, just to initiate an interior attack as soon as possible. So I guess what I would say is if you're applying water through the window for more than 5 to 10 seconds and you're not seeing a significant impact, you're probably not going to see a significant impact, and you need to work on transitioning as quick as possible to the interior, assuming conditions in the building allow for it.
Excellent. All right, what do we got?
All right, hopefully now it's the fun stuff here. I think we probably spent a little longer than we were planning going through that, but it was a fair amount of material. So with these next ones, we wanted to pick a couple of these slides, kind of walk through line placement, line selection, strategy, and tactics on a couple of these. If anybody out there listening has any of these slides they want to particularly talk about or jump into the conversation, please do so. So why don't we start out with the rural one here on the bottom left. So we have this one set up as a fire out in Beaver Creek. So it's 3:10 that's arriving. You're out away from 16s. So it's going to be a while before anybody else gets there. So what's the mode? What are your strategies and what are the tactics? So for me, this pretty clearly looks like an offensive, assuming we aren't getting any reports of occupants in there, this is going to be offensive mode. We're going to try to control the fire. The tactics, since we don't have 2 in 2 out, we're gonna do fire attack, but we're going to be limited on being able to. We could be limited on being able to make entry. For me, this is an 1 3/4 fire, And again, without having a 2 out, maybe we just stretch it to that front door and start putting water in through the window from the outside. If it's going to take a little bit of time for that next crew to get there, we don't do a whole lot of lines over ladders in this area of the country, but the goal is to get the nozzle into the fire room. You might be able to hit that for 5 to 10 seconds from the outside while your driver throws a ladder to that window, and then you climb up the ladder and you can actually get the nozzle inside that room once you get a little bit of knockback, whip that thing around, and you may be able to put that fire out from the ladder. What do you think, Chief?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there's obviously not enough roof there to stand on and operate, so you'd be operating from the ladder. But if you can get that nozzle in the window, and assuming that's the only room up there that's on fire, you have a really good chance of really getting it knocked down and potentially well on its way towards extinguishment. You know, in my experience, you can have a fire like this, and that first floor can be just about as clean and of an environment as what you're sitting in right now. So too, don't forget that it's possible to get in and get a primary search done on that first floor, and make sure you don't have a family in there trying to, you know, collect their photos or what, you know, sometimes they want to do, looking for their pet or whatever it is. You get in there, you know, if you can, make sure that first floor is evacuated. You can at least call out a primary search complete on that floor, you know, if it's not an ideal H atmosphere without your 2 out. So, but yeah, in terms of fire extinguishment, you know, you potentially could apply water from the first floor inside if it was a clean environment, if, you know, up through a stairwell or something. But again, as soon as you start flowing water, you know, the potential for it to really become untenable quick is really there. So I think that window attack is perfect. Wow, I got some people coming in the room with me now. You want to jump in? Jump in, Nick.
Hey guys, we have a request for middle left picture, I guess, and
Okay.
to throw out there, you guys as well, is if you have a webcam on your computer that you're watching this webinar with, and you would like to join the conversation, just send out you know, a question and say, hey, will you open up our mic, because we have to do that from this side, and you can join the conversation. Thanks.
Hey, Mark. So are they asking for Fox Point, the green apartment building, or the one to the basement fire to the far left?
Truck 302, can you advise on that? Left. I guess it looks like the one with the tree in the front.
Okay, the basement fire.
Maybe. Correct, Patrick?
Well, the basement fire, that's the one they want?
Far left?
Residential, what are they looking for?
Good question.
Probably the basement fire.
Just getting far left. Residential.
Okay.
Residential. Okay. So so I have this one queued up as an engine 315 Oregon City type balloon frame type house. So I don't know, Chief, what do you think on this one?
Well, for me, again, is your help there? Is it not? I like the idea of even if you got help, I like the idea in these types of fires to get a little water in those windows and see what kind of effect you can have to slow things down. The other thing is you know, we have lost some firefighters in this country by making you know, rapid advances into that front door and having the floor either burned out or fall out from underneath them. So you got to take just a little bit of time. It's obviously, to me, it looks like the stairway to the basement is somewhere close to that front door, and that fire is starting to advance from the basement into at least the first floor of that building. So I think taking some of the steam out of it with a hose line from the exterior makes a lot of sense. And I think on this too, if you had the manpower, you could keep that water flowing through that window while you slowly made your advance in there to find the stairway and get down there. You know, some of these older homes too, they had exterior basement entrances too, so you might look for that too. So that very difficult fire. This is one where you really want to try to control that flow path, even though that's going to make your primary searches on the second floor harder for you, to try to limit ventilation as best you can, because all you're going to do is draw that fire everywhere throughout that building while you're in there trying to make sure it's evacuated. I can't think of anything else to add there. I like the ladder. It's potentially going to get compromised if that fire extends up through those windows, but there's no real better place to put it. It's a good place to put that ladder to get up and get a VES down on that second floor, or at least that bedroom up there. I can't think of anything else to really comment on now. I think just early water, get water on through those windows, and see if you can take some of the heat out of it while you try to get, I keep using the phrase occupy the structure, but you got to get down in that basement to extinguish that fire.
Yeah, adding to that, I think for me, one of the top priorities that you touched on is trying to find a exterior entrance to the basement. And that would probably be our primary entry point, if we can find that. Otherwise, putting water through those windows. If you're going to advance, if the stairwell to the basement is near the front door, like you're saying, I think I would try to keep that front door as closed as we can as we're making entry. As it sits right now with that front door wide open, you're going to be advancing a hose line down the chimney of that fire, taking all the heat. So if you could try to limit the opening on the front door, that may help some of that. But this is going to be that'll be a difficult fire. I know some crews have also played around with doing window conversions, where the fires, if you can find some windows on the first floor, actually cut the wall out, try to make ourselves a little bit bigger hole to get a hose line down into.
Yeah, I actually had a fire very similar to this in Oregon City, 2-3 years ago. I don't know if any of the crews listening were there, but we had fire in the basement. It was 2 stories like this, and I was really having the crews really hold off on ventilation, and I had a lot of them calling for it, but I'm like, you know what, I'm sorry, but until we know we've got the fire in check in the basement, I got crews up there trying to do a primary search, and I don't want to make things worse. Even though things were tough on them, it could have gotten a lot worse. And that's where I was going with the fire. I was really trying to limit the flow path and changing the flow paths in that structure until we could get it checked. And it's just a difficult situation. There's no way around it.
And then in terms of a secondary hose line, if this is balloon frame construction, that thing's going to go from the basement all the way to the attic, right? So what do you think about having first line go to the basement and actually second line go up to the second floor to start pulling ceiling? Because that's probably the next place fire is going to show, right?
Yeah, most likely. Sometimes it'll it'll show in the attic. This one looks like it has a room up there. So, but it's gonna show probably in the attic. I did have a fire one time where fire spread up an exterior wall into the attic, but it also spread up an interior wall. So sometimes even your interior walls can be balloon frame type construction. Ultimately, you're going to need a line on every floor, whether you stair step it, first and then second, or you go basement second first. Ultimately, you're going to need a line to check for extension on every floor of this building. And thankfully we got enough companies and personnel on our boxes to really handle that. But as far as the second line goes, I think wherever you're trying to concentrate that search, I think would probably be your best place to put that second line.
Okay. My understanding, I don't have a ton of experience in older buildings, in older houses like this, but my understanding is the other place you tend to get vertical spread is like through the kitchen, when you have all the fixtures, all the plumbing fixtures, piping that's running down into the basement, creating void spaces, and then that creates an easy avenue for fire to travel up from the basement, basically up through the kitchen. Yeah,
Todd Gago and I were overhauling a basement one time, and we just kept noticing it just was getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and nobody was really monitoring the building. Everybody was kind of high-fiving and taking a break and rehab and whatnot, and we go check the kitchen, and the kitchen's burning above us. So yeah, exactly, that's exactly what happened. Is it followed some of those pipe chases up into the kitchen area, got the cabinets going, and then before you knew it, we were on the roof, cutting a hole. So you got to really stay after these, and you got to get a line, like I said, on every floor, and you got to check for extension pretty aggressively, or you're gonna you're going to lose it. But in terms of that second line, you know, if you're really worried about the attic, then I think you're missing out on the primary goal of our even being there. Is we got to get that place checked for, you know, human beings. We got to make sure it's evacuated, and then we can start trying to get ahead of the fire. But if we're trying to do an aggressive search, then maybe that second line maybe supports that, as at least on the floor they're working on, you know.
Okay.
Chief, sorry to interrupt, guys. Chief Shireman had mentioned as well to use your tick to see where it is running in the wall.
Yeah, ticks are a good tool on these. You can run around the outside of this building and you can get a pretty good idea if you got fire traveling in a stud bay or two and how high it's getting. And there's some limitations to that, but I think it's a very good tool and a good thing to go to. And don't forget my experience with that interior wall too. So just because you don't see anything traveling up on the exterior wall does not mean it's not headed to the attic. Trust me.
Mark, is there anything else Truck 302 was looking for on this one?
Not quite sure. I haven't got any feedback yet.
Okay. All right. Well, let's. We could go back to that one if Truck 302 has any additional discussion points they wanna hit. So how about this one? So this picture's us. For people that don't recognize it, this was a fire on. And Chief, you were command of this fire, right? You wanna run through the story on this one?
Yeah, this is off of Hemlock. It was actually on September 11th, a couple years ago, 2-3 years ago, I don't know, but that was about what we saw when Engine 1 got there, and but we also had reports of someone being in there, and there was fire showing from at least 2 sides, if not 3. I think it was probably Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, and the garage was probably on the Delta end of the building, but it, you know, for the most part looked relatively fully involved. There was a bedroom that you know, you could see was not burning there. At least it didn't have any fire venting from it. But Engine 1 elected to take that line right through that front door and push the fire toward the back, which ultimately allowed. I ended up putting the full rescue and half the truck in there to do the primary search, and they located the victim right away. And this is one of those cases where if you would elected to stretch to the back, then it would have really slowed down that search effort. Particularly if you look at this house and you try to imagine it with fire showing out the rear and not the front. And if you take the time, which actually takes longer to stretch around the house to put water on it than it does to go through the front door and put water on it. But also, if you take the time to stretch around the back, you're really limiting anybody else's ability to get in that front door to provide primary search. So, you know, in most cases, unless it's much faster, or like we've been talking, you don't have the personnel for a standby line or a backup line or anything like that, or support functions. Most cases, it's best just to go right through that nearest door. Number one, that's a lot of times where you're going to find somebody is in those paths of egress where they were trying to get out of the building. But it just allows those other functions for search to get in the building right behind you and get in there and start doing their job. So anyway, that's what they did. They located him. He was fully resuscitated and walked out of the hospital a few days later. Many of you probably remember this one, but it was a huge success and a big win for Engine 1 on this particular night.
So I believe that's firefighter Bowen and AO Ryan Harris, I believe. And I talked with at least Craig. And then I talked with it was Slagers was the pump operator on that fire. It's an impressive amount of fire pushing out of there, but those guys said that fire was basically all knocked out with about 30 to 60 seconds worth of flow. So you're talking 80 to 160 gallons, or 80 to, we'll say, 200 gallons to achieve knockdown on all that. And then they basically overhauled it off the hydrant. So they got it on tank water with 2/3 of their tank water left to spare, and they really were able to get the fire out from all Alpha all the way to Charlie. And again, I think they were surprised at how much they were able to get done and how quickly they were able to do it. And it allowed for the rescue and the truck to do a protected search behind them. I had a fire that was similar to this, my first fire on probation as a lieutenant. It took a little bit too long to get my air pack on, a little bit too long to get my tool. And as we showed up, a number of other people on scene basically grabbed my probationary firefighter and said, "Hey, the fire's around the Charlie side. It's around the Charlie side, stretch to there." So before I knew it, the attack line was going to the Charlie side. From a fire attack perspective, it seemed to go fine, but heavy rescue had come to the front door to do a search, and they had to wait to do a search because there was still fire in the front room. They had to delay their entry until engine 4 got there and stretched a line to the front door. So while our part of the job may have looked like it worked okay, it slowed Heavy Rescue 5 in the ability to accomplish their assignment because we did the long stretch around to the Charlie side where most of the fire was showing. And in reality, we could have put out the kitchen fire on the Charlie side probably from a step outside the front door because of the size of the house and the configuration. So so that was a big, again, kind of reinforced a learning for me that most of the time, if you can go in through the front door, it allows the truck and the heavy rescue to come do a protected search behind you.
And don't forget, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So, I mean, if, like you said, the kitchen fire's in the back, it's showing out the back, it's probably a shorter stretch and a faster stretch to go through the front door to that kitchen versus going around. And a lot of times you have gates and fences and debris and all kinds of stuff and Rottweilers and pit bulls and everything else back there. But so, you know, exterior attack has its time and place, and I think it's an excellent tool. But in general, you know, passing command and going offensive through the front door is my favorite go-to.
All right, Mark, is there any, are we getting any more questions or anything the stations out there want us to touch on?
I have not received any.
Okay. Okay. How about one of these apartment fires here? So townhome fire. I know this is a pretty common type of construction in 1s, 15s, 2s and 3s. I think have a bunch of these where you have an apartment, townhome style apartment where it's one unit, vertically oriented, so first and second floor, all access from the one doorway. So Chief, for me, this is a offensive mode fire unless there's reports of people inside, which would make it rescue. But I'm gonna stretch to that front door. And go inside and do an interior attack as soon as I have the staffing there to do it. We have to check the line anyway as we're charging it, and we want to check it for 5 to 8 seconds or 5 to 10 seconds to make sure we have a good flow. To me, this is a case where instead of checking your stream into the grass in front, why not check your stream into that window? That gets you a little bit of water in there initially. You're still making the stretch to make entry and to make that easier. And then as soon as you're good to go and you've verified the stream's good, you open the door and you make entry and go up and get it. The way this building's oriented, my guess is that the stairway to the second floor is probably going to be right behind that front door.
Yeah, they're almost always laid out that way in these type of buildings. Yeah, I mean, this is that classic case. You know, if you don't have anyone there to provide a standby or you're not in rescue mode, then water through that window is going to be a big help to everybody. The other thing I don't think we've touched on is I remember some results of a study. I believe it was in New York City where they were doing some exterior attacks, and yeah, when you go ahead and put water through this window, keep that stream steady. Do not rotate it. You'll end up occluding the window. In this particular case, it's pretty easy to see the only place that the heat and gases are venting from this particular fire from that front window. So you don't want to occlude that. Otherwise, you'll make the temperature go up in the other bedrooms on that second floor, and you could even potentially raise the temperature on the first floor just by occluding that window with that hose stream. So keep that stream steady, get it in there. I think, we're pushing with our 1 3/4, we're pushing almost 3 gallons per second. So yeah, 5 to 10 seconds, you're going to put a decent amount of water in there and probably make a pretty good impact. And then your transition time, then getting in, is going to make or break everything after that.
All right. Well, I think we actually blew through our 60-minute time limit by a couple minutes here. So probably, guess we should probably wrap this thing up.
Hey, Patrick.
Yes.
I do have a message that just came in, and I guess I'll read it. It's multifamily dwelling automatic rescue mode.
Well, if you go by the letter of the policy, yes. The intent of the policy was more for center hallway complexes. I would just suggest you really use your best judgment on that. But I believe, unless it's been changed and I'm not aware, the letter of the policy says multifamily dwellings. But I know that the intent of that was for center hallway complexes. So I mean, these, that townhome we just looked at, it's essentially a small house that just has its exposures are attached. Everyone has their own way out. They're not reliant on a center hallway or some sort of common way out of the building. This particular case, the fire is very contained to probably to that front room. But if not to that fire unit, it's not in the attic at this point. So, I mean, you can use your best judgment there. I don't know if Chief Shireman might have a better way to explain that than me. I know he was listening, but that's my take on it.
And so maybe taking a look at this townhome type construction versus a garden style or a deck access fire like this one, which was in Portland. In this case, you obviously have multiple units that are involved, much bigger fire problem. But even if it wasn't multiple units, the egress for all those second-story apartments is all compromised by fire.
Correct.
So I guess for me, this is very obviously rescue mode.
Yes.
Regardless of reports, because the common egress is blocked, as opposed to the other one we were looking at, which is maybe a little more nuanced. It sounds like is what you're saying.
Yeah, I look at those townhouses and I kind of see them as a single family dwelling. But I mean, I understand the point of what you're trying to make. If there's something compelling you to go into rescue mode, you can definitely defend your decision in a multifamily dwelling. But I would ask, and I'm as aggressive as anyone, and I would ask that you use some caution there and just use your best judgment.
Chief Shireman had mentioned. I don't think a townhome would be justified.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, if you decide to do it, you're gonna probably have to answer some questions. The policy's gonna come out, and I'm sorry, I just don't have a better answer for you. I wish it was more clear cut. I know that somebody was charged to work on that, and it's probably a work in progress at this point to clear that up. But today, as it stands, like I said, if this was me, I wouldn't be in rescue mode unless there was somebody telling me that there was somebody in there in this particular, because it's not very well advanced as far as the structure goes, the building goes, and like I said, everyone has their own way out. Most people could ride this out as long as we're on scene at this point. Most people could ride this out basically, without too much, danger to their lives. But that's about as politically as correct as I can get, I guess, on that.
Okay, well, unless there's any other questions, I think we're 10 minutes past our wrap-up time. Anything else to add, Chief?
No, that's it. Sorry we went a little bit long. Again, it's always our goal to keep it short, but it's hard sometimes. You only